Welcome to another edition of The Need for Courage. I'm John Byrne, your podcast host today, and with me, I'm very excited, very happy to have Dr. Terry Rynne. Terry and Sally were not only instrumental, but developed both the concepts and a lot of what we see today in the Center for Peacemaking. So we want to talk to him about that process, but also a number of other issues that still challenge us today, and obviously why peace studies is such an important part of what every citizen of any country needs to know about. So we're going to talk about that as well. So Terry, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time, and more importantly, thank you and Sally for your work in coming up with an idea that maybe didn't seem radical at the time, but the way the fruition of it today must really make you feel both proud and excited about what's going on now and hopefully the future.
I think what the staff is doing is just incredible, and there's more ahead. It is great to see it develop the way it has in the last 10 years.
Let me ask you, according to some of the things I've read, that you developed these ideas back in, and probably earlier, but back in 2006 is sort of what the center website says, and it was open for business on MLK Day in January 15th of 2008. Talk to us a bit about what got you to that stage that you thought this was so important, and also, if you wouldn't mind, why Marquette was, from your and Sally's perspective, a logical place for this to appear.
Well, during that period and before, it takes a conversion, I think, on the part of people to get this kind of vision for peace. And the conversion for me happened back in 1968. I read a book, The Nonviolent Cross, and in that, James Douglas described Mohandas Gandhi in one of the chapters. The Salt March, which turned things around totally in India. Gandhi marched with 90 well-trained satyagrahi. They were people who understood and were committed to nonviolence, 200 miles down to the seacoast at Dandi. That's where he was headed. Thousands of people gathered behind him. He had chosen a symbol that was so appropriate. The British had a monopoly on salt. They had big bins of it behind big walls. And they not only sold it to the poor, to all the people in India, but they had a tax on it as well. So people understood immediately when Gandhi said, I am going to break the law, and I'm going to pick up a handful of salt from the sea, and we're going to refine it, and people will start making their own salt. Well, that was impressive because hundreds of writers from around the world wrote about this campaign. And everybody was saying, Gandhi is taking on a country of 350 million people, and he's doing it nonviolently. The word spread because he had established his own credibility and standing. They went from there to those depots, and wave after wave of young men approached the gates and were struck down by the Pathan police with steel-tipped clubs, cracked their skulls, cracked their shoulders. I read that, and it just kept going till nighttime, and it blew me over. I said, I have to know more about this man. And over the years, I studied Gandhi and watched Gandhi's influence. And I wrote the book, Gandhi and Jesus, for my doctorate in theology, because Gandhi learned nonviolence from Jesus. He read the Sermon on the Mount, and it blew him over. I say to you, don't respond with violence. Instead, somebody strikes you on the right cheek, slaps you with great derision. Turn the other. Don't cry. Don't run. Don't respond with violence. If somebody takes your coat, okay, show them. Give them your cloak, that you're not bullied and you're not afraid and you're not going to respond violently. He read that passage, Gandhi, the rest of his life He read it first at 19 years of age. So the background for this center lies pretty deep in my experiences. My wife and I had our own companies. She sold hers, I sold mine. We said, besides making our children wealthy, what else can we do? And we said, a center for peacemaking would make so much sense at a Catholic university close enough to us so we can put our hand in it now and again. And so we tried a number of them. Notre Dame, of course, had a program somewhat along the lines of what we envisioned, but it was for postgrads. And I said, undergraduates, they're the time when they can change and develop and move. So we said no, undergraduates. So we talked with all the Catholic universities in the region, and Marquette was by far our choice. A number of reasons. One, their head of studies at that time, she had been the head of nursing, but she was devoted to the countries in Africa and to their freedom. And so it struck her immediately, enthusiastically. We had a professor of theology, Michael Duffy, who was known for sitting at the counters talking to students as they went by, getting them to sign up against Vietnam War, and so on. The percent of student learning was higher than any other Catholic university. So it was clear to us that that was the place. That's the origin of it. Thank goodness we were fortunate enough to hire as the first director Father Simon Herrick, a Jesuit scholar, marvelous man, a close friend of the Philip and Daniel Gandhi colleague. No one has ever spoken better, more convincingly than Simon about Jesus' nonviolence. And he was willing to join us as the first executive director. For 2 years, we were off to a flying start. Thank goodness we hired Patrick Kennelly as associate director just almost right after the center started. Patrick was a well-respected student. He was teaching high school. He was a Catholic worker. He took to the role so wonderfully well. Simon, after 2 years, came down with a terrible illness and needed to retire. Patrick succeeded him. Thank goodness.
So Pat's work to this day, and I consider him a friend as well, is not just local, the work he does with the Near West Side and obviously in other parts of Milwaukee, but international. And so navigating that is a big challenge, right? So in terms of the curriculum, because I know you teach at the center as well, what does peace studies encompass besides what we've just talked about? A concern about local areas of a city or a county, and of course international issues in conflict zones and other regions. So what are some of the areas of coverage that the center has with folks like yourself that come in and teach the students?
Well, the keystone, John, is nonviolence. Now, you're reading today about the just war theory, which for 10 years, the Catholic Church has been moving away from the just war theory and towards embracing fully the power of nonviolent action. Let me give you 3 quotes from the 3 recent popes. Pope John Paul II. So how far this has gone back? It's a little more than 10 years that the Catholic Church, even though in the Catholic Catechism is the just war theory, it's been with us ever since Augustine. It gives people who are thinking of war rules for judging whether it's just or not. But we have known for a long time that's important to have that kind of legal structure, even though Trump just dismisses it. But it's not what Jesus taught. It's not close. That's why I wrote Gandhi and Jesus. Jesus, his Sermon on the Mount, it was practiced well until Augustine. First 3 centuries of the church, a third of the Roman Empire had been converted because of the way people acted. The passage in Luke, when Jesus and his disciples are on their way to Jerusalem, and they're not getting any respect. And it's the Samaritans who are sort of outcasts. And Peter and John, James, they say, Lord, we're going to call fire down from heaven on these people because they don't respect us. And Jesus says, calm down, boys. That's not what we teach. Read that Sermon on the Mount later in the garden. Those who live by the sword die by the sword. Well, the early church, did you know that Christians were the only ones who didn't join the Roman rebellion in 66? They went across the river to Pella, and they knew that wasn't what they should be doing. And as I said, they went from there. The early church practiced nonviolence. And we were just coming back to it. The quote from John Paul II. I thought, this is right after Poland was freed nonviolently, with his help too. He said, I thought all these years since the Second World War, we would see a third world war as people revolted to get under the pale of Russia. I thought that's what would happen. And instead, these people of Eastern Europe, Czechoslovakia, Poland, all did it non-violently. So John Paul II was the first who just stood up with it and said, oh my goodness, this is so important. Benedict XVI said, the Sermon on the Mount is the rock for Christianity. And he meant this way of dealing with violence, much beyond the just war theory. It's as Gandhi did it, as so many did it in the next 60 years. The head of the church could not overlook it. Right. Knew we needed to make this shift ourselves. So, Pope Benedict XVI, Pope John, of course, Pope John wrote a marvelous document in 2019, Nonviolence, a Style of Politics for Peace. And I teach it in my class, of course, and I ask students at the end of the reading, what just stands out for you? And this past year, one young man said, when he said, we believe Jesus' teachings, but Jesus' teachings includes the teachings on nonviolence. John wrote that, yes. And the whole class said, yes, he did. And he also said, in order to practice nonviolence, one has to turn from violence and follow Jesus. It's just in his bones, John. We have been trying, when I say we, I and a group called Catholics for Nonviolence Initiative have been giving workshops in Rome. And that's how Pope John wrote that wonderful book on nonviolence. He asked us to write it for him. And we met just last year. I gave a talk in Rome, why the Catholic Church is returning again to nonviolence. I was so grateful that I could give that talk. And I hope I'm addressing what you're saying about what you're hearing these days about the just war.
Right.
But going beyond what is happening, Cardinal McElroy, who is one of those 3 that you saw interviewed last week, he has attended all 3 over these last 10 years. Last year, he sat in the back row and he listened. And there were 100 people from around the world that are trying to resist violence. From the Philippines again to the river in South America, people who are trying to dig and destroy their land. They're trying to resist nonviolently. 100 people, all of whom who spoke to one another. And he listened. He sat in the back row, listened for 2 straight days. And finally, he stood up at the end. He said, if Pope John, he was still alive, come and talk and do something with you. I'm sorry, Pope Francis, not Pope John the 23rd. That's a different question. But Pope Francis, if he came and said, what can I do for you? They all said, write an encyclical. Because you're hearing these days that in the Catholic Catechism, it talks about the just war theory, which it does. But the church, many, many people who have already turned and appreciated the power of nonviolent action that doesn't produce follow-up evil and follow-up violence. So many have already embraced it. Not the U.S., of course. Our seminaries still need to make that change. Priests increasingly are saying, my gosh, I need to catch up because I'm not teaching peace. I'm teaching a pale invitation.
Terry, let me ask you,
You bet.
do you think now that Pope Leo has spoken out so forcefully about nonviolence regarding the war in Iran and the other wars, the war in Gaza, that there's an opportunity for the U.S. part of the Catholic Church to be more in line with what you and your colleagues have talked about? It certainly seems that way, but are you optimistic? It seems like Pope Leo is definitely taking a page out of what you folks have been talking about for quite a long period of time.
I have a good friend, a teacher at DePaul, Ken Benedict, who from the beginning of his papacy now has been collecting his talks on peace. And he's up to 3 volumes. I mean, it's deep in Leo. He understands too. He'll be the 4th pope in a row. And an encyclical, it might not sound very important, but Laudato Si on the environment, influenced the Catholic Church very much. And so did Pacem in Terris from John the 23rd. It can have a great influence, especially if it goes with, as I said, seminaries, preaching from the pulpit. When's the last time you heard somebody talk about nonviolence from the pulpit? There are priests, of course, but not many. The church itself, the people in the pews could be a tsunami for peace, without a doubt. Just the way they're reacting. Yeah, boy, that certainly sounds like there should be legitimate authority and just cause and a possibility of winning, etc., all the principles of the just war. Well, just wait until they get a load of what Gandhi and Martin Luther King were talking about, which, it just hasn't reached the pews very well.
Right. Let me go back in the time we got left.
So at Marquette, we're going to have a lot of students go out and be able to not only preach, but practice nonviolence.
You want to mention some of the faculty supporters outside of the center, and also I know the center does rely on financial support. Talk a bit about the support you get from both the academic world at Marquette, but also from other supporters, maybe alums or businesses. Talk a bit about that and how that's helped the center stay as relevant as it is.
Yeah, Patrick just received a grant for $50,000 to support one of the key programs, which is in-depth experiences for students. Patrick takes them to India. They sign up and go and get, it's paid for. There's each year a bus full of Marquette students goes the whole path of civil rights and learns what that was like. El Salvador. Anyway, the money that I just mentioned is from a woman. Let me describe quickly. I know you don't have much time. The program that was from the beginning funded students with their own projects for peace during the summer. And they come back after and present. One woman who was a supporter, and her husband was too, then he died, was very wealthy, a close friend of Sally and mine. she came and heard that presentation. And it was from a young woman who went that summer to Oklahoma to work with an agency that was working with women getting involved in sex work because there was a big spread of oil discovery and a lot of men coming and a lot of sex workers being involved. And this young woman worked diligently with people, for people who wanted assistance. She came back, gave her talk, and our friend at the end wrote a check of support because she was so impressed. And that check just came, the one that I mentioned, big one, from the same thing. So, yeah, there's great support once people see young people taking. One thing we haven't mentioned, Michael Duffy, 2 years in to the center, wrote a proposal to the powers that be. One of them was that provost that I mentioned before, and said, we need a major in peace studies and a minor. Yeah, they've got one at Notre Dame, but who cares? Ours is going to be better. And finally, it was okay. Every year we have 30 students, I think, in a classroom times 3. It's been the fastest growing major. There's finance people, accounting people, nurses, all of whom leave. And hopefully, they have a whole different lens. It's not just, it is peacemaking. It's really possible. And nonviolent action and learning all about that is integral for the rest of my life. So,
well, Terry, let me end on this and really appreciate not just what you and Sally have done, but your commitment to this over such a long period of time. We could talk for a long time on a number of other related topics, but I want to end on this. If
Sure.
You're talking to a Marquette student who hasn't decided yet on a major or a minor, and as you just said, you can be in nursing, you can be in finance, but no matter what, you can benefit from peace studies. How would you sell that, besides for those obvious mentions that I just had? How would you sell that to a student who's interested in helping society, whether locally or internationally, and you come to him and say, or her, and say, peace studies is a place in which can complete what you're considering? How do you sell peace studies?
Well, one of the great things at Marquette is that double majors are definitely common and possible and encouraged. It means you get a little more narrow focus on 2 instead of all kinds of gym programs or whatever, that can. Anyway, that's the first answer, because I've seen people now do both. We have graduates. We have a key person in the Nonviolent Peace Force. It's a not-for-profit all over the world who almost single-handedly freed the people in the Philippines. But Nonviolent Peace Force, founded in this country, but doing accompaniment in South Africa for people under violence. She's a director of community relations for them. We have a young woman, one of the first classes I taught, who was in the city government she's an alderperson in Boston, and boy, the vision she's got, she is putting into effect. So, and there is a program, Doing Good While Doing Well, that the center puts on, that exposes to the range of do good possibilities for students, which we owe them. And I love when finance comes and they say, what? And pretty soon they're saying, oh yeah. And we can see what the country's culture ends up doing because of an overcommitment to wealth. So there's an anti-wealth possibility, but that isn't the main point. The main point is you will be such a better father, a better spouse, if you can practice these principles of Jesus' nonviolence. nonviolence.
Terry, I want to thank you for this. This is a great overview of not just the center, but obviously the value proposition of nonviolence. We're going to continue to highlight these topics with these podcasts that Pat has set up. And again, I want to thank you and Sally for having the vision here, but also to stay so committed. I think it's pretty obvious your passion and commitment to this space. And hopefully we'll get a few additional people thinking about peace studies as a value curriculum, no matter what they decide to do. I think that's pretty clear. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, John, for your great work. I appreciate it. And thanks, Chris, for his help in getting this started.